And game on. It is time for Chew on Sports. It is time to chew. As always, it is Zach Van Meter here to give you all the latest sports news, and my player two, Chris, is here as well.
Hello, world.
Now, we have something very special for everyone. This is going to be an all Dallas Mavericks pod. We have a special player three. He really should be the player one. I have Mr. Dalton Trigg on the line.
With Alice Cooper.
And he's with Alice Cooper, apparently. All right, so Dalton, yeah, we're goofballs, Dalton, so I apologize in advance. Dalton has been so gracious as to hop on the pod with us this evening. I sent him a message via Twitter, and to let you, the listener, know a little bit about Dalton real quick before I give the floor over to him. Dalton is a reporter for DallasBasketball.com for Mr. Mike Fisher, who frequents our local, the 105.3 The Fan here in Dallas.
Exclusive.
That is right. He also has his own podcast. He is on Step Back Mavs, which is on Anchor and iTunes. And you can follow Dalton, by the way, at DALTON_Trigg, TRIGG. And on Step Back Mavs, it's at STEPBACKMAVS. He is a Mav fan for life, and we're thrilled to have him here. Say hello to the people, Dalton.
How's it going, guys? Really appreciate that. And look, you don't have to tell me about being a goofball. If y'all follow me on Twitter and throughout the season with the Mavs cat stuff and stuff of that nature, I can be a little bit of a goofball myself.
Where did you come up with this Mavs cat thing? By the way, for those of you who don't know, if you look at his profile right now, he's got a picture. His pinned tweet is with Kemba Walker, Porzingis, and Luka, who's the big three that I think all three men on this podcast want. And then on his podcast, it's a screaming cat in a cowboy hat that's yelling. Where did this come from? Where did you find this?
Okay, so you guys know Mavs Reddit?
Yes.
Reddit Mavs on Twitter. Well, he was putting out, just the actual cat itself, throughout the season. And I kept, the more I saw it, I was just like, you know what? I'm going to put a Mavs logo on that cowboy hat and just make it, make it Mavs related. And I mean, from there it took off. We added a bunch of, transparent, pictures of players, Dirk and, other players we might want in free agency. And, man, it exploded from there. So haven't done it in a while because it's kind of a dead point in the offseason until we get closer to the draft and free agency. But yeah, it really took off towards the end of this year. So
I remember I saw it quite a bit around the trade deadline, and it would crack me up every time. So
yes, yeah. Now my I guess my favorite thing to post these days is that I've got a GIF of it's Luka blocking Trae Young, and Trae Young's throwing up the Rookie of the Year trophy, which is the ball. So he's blocking
nice
Trae for Rookie of the Year. So that's my current thing that I'm doing right now.
Oh, that's great. Let me ask you something. I know that I've been following you on Twitter for a while. Back whenever you used to do, I think you were writing for yourself, kind of for the Mavs, right? You're DallasBasketball.com. When did that happen?
Well, I actually started out it was Mavs Fanatic at the time.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
And now they're Dallas Sports Fanatic. But I started at Mavs Fanatic. Michael Lark, great dude. He gave me my start. I was just finishing up college, and I had all this stuff I wanted to do. I didn't go to school for journalism. I was in a college of business, got my entrepreneurship degree, and but I've always had this knack for writing stuff, and I've always had a passion for the Mavs. So I just talked to Michael Lark a little bit, and he gave me a shot there, and then I eventually moved on to Mavs Moneyball, and then this opportunity came up with Mike Fisher, and I mean, I just had to take it, and I mean, it's been great. It's been really fun. I don't plan on going anywhere for a while. Probably ever, because Fish is such a good dude. He takes care of us over there.
That's crazy. A funny story. The seats he sits in courtside for the Mavs game, he sits one row in front of my boss. So they're kind of friendly a little bit, is what my boss Alan tells me. So that's kind of funny how that worked out. So let me ask you this: you're writing for the Mavs now. What made you you have a Mavs passion now? You're not from Dallas, right?
Right. Yeah, I'm in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, born and raised. I go on credential for all the Pelicans and Mavs games. When they play down there, it's only about a hour and a half drive from my house down to New Orleans. So
okay,
I go down for all those games. That's where I started, doing the credential stuff, and then I try to make it out to Dallas, 3-4 times a year if I can, and go to games out there too. But yeah, I'm not even based in Dallas. I know a lot of people know that, but some of my recent followers they may not know that.
Right on. So when did the passion for Mavs? Because you can just go to your Twitter page or listen to the podcast, obviously, or even you talk now, and I can just feel the fire, so to speak. So when did the Mavs passion start for you? Was it as a kid or teenager, adult, recently? When was this?
Well, it's and I long time. I actually wrote a piece about this when I was with Mavs Moneyball. I'd have to dig deep to find it now, but when I was growing up, my dad he had this he started this business that flourished really, and the business was it had us going out to the Dallas area pretty much every other weekend. We were making trips out there and coming back, and he was selling utility trailers, and so we would always go through Dallas. And one day we were going through, and I was already a big NBA fan because my grandfather he was a huge basketball fan. That's where I get my passion for the game.
Nice.
Always watched the NBA. Always, I watched Dirk, Nash, and Finley from a distance. But, we were going through Dallas one time, and we saw a billboard, and it said that it was the Mavs versus the Suns. And it said Game 5. And we were like, I didn't know much about I wasn't real deep into it at the time, but, we found a scalper, and we went to the game, and turns out that was Game 5 of the Western Conference Finals in 2005, and Dirk dropped 50.
That's a great way to be introduced to Dirk live, man.
Yeah.
God, that was a great series.
Funny story for me. I lived in Dallas since I was 12, all the way back in '96. I didn't know the Mavs had a basketball team until they signed Dennis Rodman.
See, Dalton, I'm an OG, bro. I started watching the Mavs in 1991. Like, they were awful.
Nice.
Like, I remember picking up, we only had, I think, Live 95 was the first real kind of basketball game that wasn't side-scroller, and they were, like, Fat Lever was their point guard back then. It was awful. It wasn't even Jason Kidd yet, I think. But, man, I go way back with it, so I respect that. You know what sucks about that is the Spurs versus Mavs was so much of a better series the round before than that Suns series was, but that was fun too because Nash. I was scared of Phoenix, man. Nash, I thought he was gonna. I thought it was his mission to do us in, man. Him and Amari Stoudemire, but didn't happen.
Yeah.
Didn't happen.
Yeah, and look, like I said, I always had because we would take family vacations out in that area every now and then, and. I would watch the Mavs from a distance if they ever had a national TV game. Obviously, I didn't have the local channels where I'm at, but, it was just funny to me because after that 50-point outburst, and it just happened to be the Western Conference Finals, it's like something like that being your first live experience, you can't help but, just be hooked from that point on.
For sure, and, man. That's awesome.
And then I always tell people that, as much happiness as that brought me, them going to the finals and everything, had one of the best happy points ever as an early Mavs fan, and then for them to, blow a 2-0 lead in the finals right after that, it was
that was
pretty heartbreaking.
That was the refs against Mark Cuban.
That was a dark time, my man, because as finally getting over the hump in the playoffs, when the narrative was that the Mavs couldn't do that, and then doing it, and then the next season being the best team in the NBA and getting bounced, and then we went through kind of a 3 or 4 year just meh period when they traded to get Kidd back, and then it all kind of came to fruition, man. It's awesome.
People keep saying that the Mavs couldn't win, but they got to realize that they were going against the dynasty of the Lakers and the dynasty of the Spurs.
Yeah, that's tough to squeeze in through that.
It's not like we were getting beat by nobodies.
So Chris has question 2 for you. Fire away, Chris.
What were you doing when you found out about the KP trade?
Okay, so this is also pretty cool for me too, because, and Matt, he can vouch for me. I was, before anything even came out about the Porzingis, well, I take that back. Woj had tweeted out something that, Porzingis wanted to be traded, and I think he listed the Spurs, the Raptors, and some other team, I can't think, but the Mavs weren't listed.
The Nets.
And, and so the Mavs weren't listed, but obviously when I see something like that, and that's somebody I wrote about in the previous summer, saying that was my pipe dream, who I wanted in Dallas, obviously my mind goes to trade scenarios. And so I put together one on, I use TradeNBA.com because I think it's better than the ESPN trade machine, but I put together one that it was almost identical to what actually went down. And I sent it to Matt, and then I sent it to somebody else, and they were like, you need to post that. And so I did. I posted it. And then not even an hour later, the news broke. Like, it's so crazy how fast it went from, KP wants a trade to KP got traded. It happened so fast.
Well,
and when it came out, and it was almost identical to that thing I had just done, I was just like, I was just going nuts.
Well, it's crazy, too. I have 2 boys, and they go to youth on Wednesday nights. And my wife and I were like, let's turn this into a makeshift date night while we have an hour. So we went to a Mexican restaurant the night before, and that's when Dennis Smith had his triple-double versus the Knicks. So we're watching it, and we're whooping them. And I remember seeing Luka and KP at the end of the game, and I told my wife, I was like, man, that dude is such a beast. I wonder when he's going to come back and be healthy again. And we were talking about Dennis Smith and how proud we were of him having a good game, because obviously all the trade speculation the weeks before with him, and he stepped away from the team for a bit. So there was a lot going on. I'm sitting here thinking we're going to be lucky to get like a Jonathan Isaac type player for Dennis Smith if they do move him.
Right.
And then this happened, right? Woo!
Right. I mean, you had some people saying that Jonathan Isaac was wishful thinking. I mean, even though we label stuff as pipe dreams, nobody was expecting to basically flip Dennis Smith and a couple of future firsts that aren't going to be great anyway for Kristaps Porzingis. That was absolutely crazy. And I don't care what they say. Luka kind of denied it, but I don't care what they say. They knew about that trade coming that night, or they knew it was at least in the works, about to be finalized.
For sure. Oh, yeah. And you know who we should thank for all of this is DeAndre Jordan. Because him spurning the Mavs a few years ago is what made all of this possible. It equaled Dennis Smith and Luka, and then he was part of the trade that brought KP as well. So it's just kind of his one decision to change his mind just put all of this in motion, which is really crazy when you think of one event. So
yeah, it's fun. It's funny to see it come full circle like that.
Yeah. So I've got a third question for you, and I know because we were actually, for a brief bit, I couldn't commit the time to it. We were briefly in an NBA 2K league together a few seasons ago. But a leak came out a few days ago. I know you've seen this now because you posted about it. But apparently Dwayne Wade, not Dwayne versus Dirk like I guessed on my podcast a few weeks ago is the cover, but Dwayne Wade apparently is going to be the Legend Edition of 2K20. Are you about to boycott NBA 2K next year? Is that going to be a thing?
Well, no, I'm not going to boycott 2K because NBA Live, and you've probably seen me say this too. I mean, they've definitely improved over the years, but they're not quite where they need to be to give 2K some real competition. But that being said, I'm just going to wait for the regular version to come out, and I'm just going to ignore the Legend Edition.
Yeah. It just doesn't exist.
I will pay the regular price for the regular edition, and I will, forget the extra VC and all that stuff that comes with Legend Edition.
Well, funny story. I do some cover votes for all the sports games. Chris and I did our cover predictions for Madden, and Chris actually guessed Patrick Mahomes correctly. And then we put a vote out and stuff. So I did one for NBA Live. I haven't got the 2K yet. I did one for NBA Live, and Luca is the one that won the cover vote for NBA Live.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and listen to this. We don't know if that's officially official, but EA Madrid is actually helping make the game this year. So wouldn't that just be kind of full circle if something like that happened?
That'd be really cool, dude. And I actually bought NBA Live this year too, because I'd heard that they were making some pretty significant improvements, and I really enjoyed the game. I'm not saying I didn't. I'm just saying when you're comparing it side by side with 2K, there's just
oh no,
they still have a ways to go. But yeah, that's pretty cool, man. I'll probably pick that up if that happens.
Oh, for sure. I think I would buy two. I think I would frame one because no Dallas Mav has ever been on the cover of anything.
I'd buy two and have Lucas sign it.
Yeah, that'd
be play the other one.
All right, Chris, fire away with question 4, sir.
Yeah. So the next question is a little Mavs draft. I'm on the NBADraft.net, and they have the Mavs taking Tyler Cook out of Iowa, the 6'8" power forward, point forward, whatever you want to call him. Is that somebody you're hearing the Mavs are actually going to take, or is there somebody else you're hearing that they're more interested in at this point?
I haven't heard much about him. I'm more looking at Naz Reid from LSU. I think if he's one of those guys that the talent, if you're just going by talent alone, he might not even fall to number 37, but if he does get to 37, I think it'd be hard for the Mavs to pass him up. Another guy I've been really, really interested in is Darius Bazley. And the only thing about Bazley is it's kind of like a Mitchell Robinson situation. He didn't go to college. He was going to, play a year in the G League. Something happened there, and he just ended up working out on his own. So there's not a lot of tape on him. He's kind of an unknown, but he's really physically gifted. Nobody can know if he can shoot, but he was one of the top. He was one of the top recruits. Before he decided he wasn't going to go to college, one of the top high school players out there. And the only thing with him is he signed with Clutch Sports. And I know the Mavs probably wouldn't be very thrilled about that, given their experiences with Clutch Sports and, how Clutch Sports operates overall.
Right.
With other NBA teams. But that's one guy I'm looking at. But really, above all else, the guy that I've loved, before he had a great tournament and his popularity started to grow, was Matisse Thybulle out of Washington. And like I said, he had a good tournament. ESPN started writing pieces on him. He really started to make a name for himself. So I think that's kind of like a pipe dream at this point. I think he's kind of secured himself in that first round, either mid to late first round. But that's who I would.
What do you think the chances are the Mavs? And obviously we don't know until it plays out, but I think the Mavs hit on Brunson. I think he's a special player, and
absolutely,
he's a poor man's JJ Barea pretty much for what he can bring and what he can offer to our offense moving forward. So what do you think the chances are we hit with another just person that can be a contributor year one and round two?
I think there's a good shot at it, because if you look at some of these prospects that are going to be available around that number 37 range, aside from Darius Bazley, there's a lot of upperclassmen, similar to Brunson. Now, they didn't win National Player of the Year, but there's a lot of really good upperclassmen that are going to slip, to that range in the draft just because of that. They're upperclassmen. NBA teams like to take the younger guys early because they have more years to develop them. So I think they have a good chance of, getting a really good guy at the number 37 spot if they even keep the pick. That's something else, we can get into if we need to. But
oh, yes. Please do.
Do we
Please.
talk about old Clint Capella?
Please get into Clint Capella.
Yeah, I was going to say, if they even keep the pick, I think they'll get a good player because Brunson, like you said, he turned out to be an awesome pickup. He's actually bigger than what most people think. I mean, he's actually 6'2", 6'3", so he's bigger than Barea. And I mean, I could see him being, like you said, a poor man's J.J. Barea. I see more like a poor man's Kyle Lowry.
Oh, that's phenomenal.
That's
I'll take that all day. I'd be happy just with the Barea. We'll stay on the draft pick before we move on. So I listened to your podcast on Step Back Mavs, and you were talking about Capella and the likelihood of pieces moving if Houston really is looking to move him. So we can absorb his salary. So that's a totally doable move, correct?
Yeah. I mean, it really just depends on, like with Houston, when do they want to, like, if they are trying, maybe they know through back channels that they have a shot at, a big-time guy like Kevin Durant or Klay Thompson or, maybe even a hometown guy like Jimmy Butler. Maybe they know that one of those guys wants to come play in Houston. Well, for that to happen, they're obviously in cap hell right now. They can't do much unless they start shedding salary. And
right.
They can't really take salary back in return if they want to get the full, space from it. So that's where the Mavs would come in, is if Houston wanted to do something with Capella before free agency starts. Because right now, if they wanted to do it before free agency starts, the Mavs are pretty much the only team that can just absorb that contract without sending any salary back because of that historically large trade exception they created by the Harrison Barnes trade.
Right.
And you can't combine players with that trade exception. You just have to absorb it. Now, it's to my understanding, they could send, the number 37 pick if they wanted to, maybe like a future second rounder to pair with it, something like that, just so Houston's not, they're not just getting nothing for it. But yeah, I mean, it just really depends on what Houston wants to do and when they want to do it.
Yeah, I hear you talking about the trade exception and all that. For the people that out there that don't know, how does that work salary-wise?
Well, it's kind of deceiving. If you come up on a situation like with Houston, which is that's a real, in my opinion, that's a real possibility because, Fish's sources are telling him that, Houston is the one contacting Dallas about this, trade inquiry. So that tells me, even though some people look at it and say, oh, well, what can we give Houston that they'd actually want? Well, by Houston being the one initiating it, obviously we do have something that they want, and the most obvious thing you can think of is the cap space. So that's one thing I wanted to point out. That's a very real thing. But the trade exception itself is kind of like an illusion because you could just wait until free agency and, just disregard the trade exception, and it just acts as your actual cap space. So,
let me ask you a question. For Houston, they're obviously one of the better teams in the West. They got the unlucky break of Golden State in the second round, or they're probably in the Western Conference Finals, right?
Right.
Are they moving Capella if they can't find somebody to take on Paul's contract, you think?
That's a good question. And I've actually talked about this with Matt Gladson. He's my co-host at Step Back. But when we were first talking about this, I was like, if they don't have a taker for Chris Paul, like say LeBron wanted to play with his buddy Chris Paul.
The banana boat, yes.
Yeah, and they have the cap space, so they could. There could be a trade to be worked out there where he goes to Los Angeles if the Lakers miss out on some of their other top targets. But if there isn't a separate trade for Chris Paul going somewhere else, it's almost like Capella would be the incentive for a team taking on Chris Paul's contract. So we've talked about that too. There are ways that you could have a Chris Paul and Capella to Dallas trade, which I'm not for. I mean, I think Rick Carlisle could do some good stuff with Chris Paul still, but I mean that contract is just absolutely horrible. I really think I'd stay away from that. But yeah, I mean it's a good thing to bring up. Capella could end up being an incentive for somebody taking on Chris Paul.
For sure. I think you hit the nail on the head, man. I think the Lakers are the only Huckleberry for Chris Paul. I really do. At this point, maybe Dallas misses out on my next question, and it becomes a reality. I don't know. But obviously, my fifth question is that I'm a big believer that Kemba should be the number one target, the best target, and that would be such a massive win to have a big three of Porzingis and Luka and Kemba. So hashtag Kemba to Dallas.
Absolutely.
What are your thoughts of this man? Obviously, you're on board with myself. Why do you think it would work so well for any Mavs fan that's out there like, hey, Luka should have the ball in his hand. I don't want Kemba here. Tell them why we want Kemba here.
Well, look, before I actually get into his potential fit with Luka and everything, just back to the Chris Paul thing real quick. If Kemba does leave Charlotte, there was I forget who reported, but there was like a report the other day that Charlotte could have some interest in Chris Paul if Kemba leaves.
Oh.
And I was thinking, that'd be pretty cool. He's playing for the Hornets again, even though it's in Charlotte, not New Orleans. And then somebody on Twitter, I'm pretty active with Mavs Twitter and, talking with people and everything. And one guy brought up that Chris Paul is like one of the biggest faces of the Jordan brand right now, too. So
yeah, it'd also bring him closer to home, too.
Right. So, I mean, there's a lot of, other than that huge contract, there's a lot of, boxes you can check off for why Chris Paul to Charlotte would make a lot of sense. But as far as the actual fit, I think there's a difference between a player being ball dominant and being a ball hog. So, and it's like we've been discussing, because like when I first found out that the Mavs aren't interested in Jimmy Butler, pursuing Jimmy Butler, my first thought was like, well, that doesn't really make much sense because he's a ball dominant player just like Kemba is. But I mean, it's really different. Kemba, Jimmy's more of a ball hog, and Kemba is, he's had to be ball dominant in his career by default because he hasn't had the pieces around him to, play any different. But in my opinion, it worked really well. He's a fantastic cutter. He's a good enough shooter to where he can play off the ball and it won't be any problem. Luka can find him for open shots and he can hit them. It's not going to be a situation like it was with Dennis Smith Jr., who was, a player that he improved his shot from year one to year two, but it was still very much a work in progress. So, I mean, you could have like a 1A, 1B pairing with Luka and Kemba handling the ball, and both guys are still going to get their numbers. It's just going to make the whole entire offense run more smoothly. And you have Kristaps Porzingis now too, and he's going to get his number. That's what I was telling somebody the other day. That team would probably average about 125 points a game, and they might give up 120 or so.
Right? Yeah, it'll be the Donnie Nelson Mavs, man, is what it'll be like,
yeah.
Right?
And I mean, really, it depends on the pieces that you'd put around those three players too. How you fill in the other two starters and
for sure
what the bench looks like and all that. But I mean, hey, that team that wins you a bunch of games. I think it pretty much assures that you get a playoff spot in the West. I'm not sure exactly where.
Right, 50 wins could be the 8th seed next year in the West for all we know.
Exactly. Yeah, and I mean, I think that team with a healthy Kristaps Porzingis, a second-year Luka, and Kemba in a new environment under Rick Carlisle, I think that team makes the playoffs for sure. but yeah, that's my thinking on it. People are saying the fit wouldn't work. I just don't see that. I think the fit would work. It's not a perfect fit, but I mean, it's a heck of a lot better than, some of the other options in free agency.
And you know what I think about Dalton? Whenever I think about Kemba and Luka playing together, and by no means am I saying they're on the same level as the two names about to drop, but for me, it's very similar to LeBron and Kyrie with Cleveland. It's two players that can handle the ball, play off ball, play everywhere, and quite frankly, the defense has no clue where it's coming from. You surround them with shooters and hustlers, and you got something.
Yeah. I actually hadn't thought about that. That's actually a really nice comparison. I mean, and there's some people, national media, with this upcoming free agency, that have said, the Knicks, take the Knicks for example, they've been linked to Kyrie for a while now.
Right.
And there's been, I've heard a couple people, Rick Bucher was one of them. He was like, the Knicks should probably focus more on Kemba than Kyrie, given the durability and everything. Kyrie, he can't stay on the court, where Kemba, he's missed 4 games in the last 4 years. So, and they're similar players. They're walking buckets.
Oh, for sure.
So I think that's a really good comparison. I can see a little Kyrie, LeBron light going on in Dallas.
I appreciate that. Well, let me ask you this. Today I was listening to the radio on my way home, and I'm a big listener to the Ben and Skin show here on 105.3 The Fan. And they actually were talking Dallas Mavs for pretty much the majority of my commute home. And I touched base with you before the pod started on this, so I'm just going to bring it up for the people, because this weekend it dropped that Kemba pretty much publicly has said that it's a long quote to break down, but it's pretty much the gist of it is that the 5th year is a big deal. The fact he made all NBA third team's a big deal because they can offer him more money. And a lot of people, when that happened, especially on Mavs Twitter, and people that follow our organization have said, okay, well, there's already the first domino that didn't fall the Mavs' way. Unfortunately, because of the what's happened to the Mavs in the past, people don't think of the positive like they need to. Like seeing the positive in the DeAndre situation, so to speak. But Jeff Skin Wade had a very, very valid point. Are we sure that Charlotte even wants him? Because they paid him $12 million last year and missed the playoffs. So are they wanting to pay the man triple this to not make the playoffs again? If the Knicks are about to get better, Brooklyn's going to be better, and Atlanta's just getting better. I don't know if that's the best move for them. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that Skin kind of hit on something there?
Yeah, and look, that's similar to what I've been saying too since it came out that Kemba was eligible to get that Supermax contract, because in my opinion, when that happened, it put Charlotte in an even more complicated situation than what they were in. Because I mean, if he didn't make third all-team NBA, I think it makes it a little bit easier to offer him a normal max, and maybe you do 4 or 5 years with that, and then, but even, I don't know, it makes it a almost impossible situation for them, because what do? Do you let an all-star point guard that averages 26 points, 6 assists per game, face of the franchise, just walk for nothing and completely start over, or do you pay him the money he wants, and, like we were talking about before we jumped on here, they're in cap hell for the next 4 or 5 years. And, with the contracts they already have on their roster, there's really no easy way for them to improve much. And they're already not a playoff team in the Eastern Conference. So, I mean, there's a lot for them to think about there. And, I mean, I've seen some people say that, they might pay him the money just for marketing reasons, because to sell tickets and merchandise and stuff, that all that stuff's going to take a hit if he just walks for nothing, and they're stuck with that roster minus Kemba. That's going to be a nightmare. But I don't know, and I've even said even if they offer him the Supermax, from what he said throughout the season, And I know once that money's sitting in front of him, it's going to be really hard for him to turn down if it's offered. But
right.
From what he said up to this point, he's made out like the money doesn't matter as much as winning does. If he stays in Charlotte, he wants there to be a reason to stay there and win other than just, him getting money. So I don't know. From what he said, it makes me think that he's going to leave no matter what. But I mean, we'll see how it goes, because I mean, not many people turn down that much of that amount of money if they're offered it.
No, for sure. All right, on to question 6 from Chris.
All right, so let's try and spin this in a positive. If we don't get Kemba, are you okay with getting Pat Beverly instead?
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of Patrick Beverly. At first I was like, well, it really depends on what the Mavs would be paying him. But recently put out a piece for DallasBasketball.com. It's what I call a plan B, and I didn't do that on purpose. That's just how it turned out with it being Beverly and Bogdanovich from from Indiana. They both start with B, so that was my plan B. If they don't get Kemba, use that space, maybe even create a little bit more space by waiving Courtney Lee, or even trying to trade Courtney Lee to gain that extra 12, 13 million in cap space, and split their aces, so to speak. And that's, to me, when you get down into the second, third tier guys, I just see a lot of potential in pairing Patrick Beverly and Bojan Bogdanovich from Indiana, because both of those guys are over 40%, shooting threes. Patrick Beverly, he doesn't average a lot of points per game, but he's a menace defensively.
He's a dog, man.
He is. He's a dog. He could be like our modern day Deshaun Stevenson.
Yes.
And Bogdanovich, he's being slept on, dude. I went on Basketball Reference the other day, just trying to prove a point. I looked up his stats versus Chris Middleton. And, I mean, it's pretty close. Chris Middleton's a better defender, but offensively, Bogdanovich, he's got the advantage on him. And he's not going to cost near as much money as Middleton is going to cost. Because, Middleton, he's going to be close to a max. I think you could get Bogdanovich for around, 17, 18 million a year, something like that.
Wow.
And then another reason I like that pairing, they're both 30 years old. And I feel like if you overpay them a little bit, you could get them on a 2-year deal. Both of them on 2-year deals.
Nice.
Which I would be fine with. I'd be fine with that because, both of those guys, even if you're overpaying for them, they're coming off the books in 2021, and we all know Giannis Antetokounmpo is an unrestricted free agent then. And we know how Donnie Nelson likes him, and, they went and added Kostas Antetokounmpo to their roster, and I mean, it would not shock me at all if they're looking that far ahead already.
I'm feeling the vibe that you're putting down, my man, for sure.
I mean, that'd be a good starting five. Luka, KP, Tim Hardaway Jr., Bogdanovich.
Well, at that point, Tim Hardaway would be gone at that point, probably.
Nah, man, he'd still be there. He could be your sixth man.
Yo, why not?
So we've gone over some at DallasBasketball.com. We've kind of been brainstorming potential ways that the Mavs could shed Tim Hardaway Jr. and get more cap space that route. But there's really not much that works. I've accepted that he's going to be a Maverick until 2021, and that's fine. He's really athletic. I think it's going to work out better than how the Wes Matthews stuff worked out. So I think once he comes back, gets healthy, and gets used to Rick Carlisle, I think he'll help his efficiency. And I don't think it's going to be near as bad as what most Mavs fans think.
Oh, for sure.
Speaking of health, how's he doing on his comeback tour?
Oh, Hardaway?
Yeah.
Well, I haven't talked to him personally, but I do keep up with him on social media and everything. I mean, he looks like he's doing pretty good. He's been going to all these events and going on vacation and just chilling. He doesn't have anything on his leg right now, so I mean that's a good sign. He's walking and doing all that. So I don't know exactly where he is in his, return progress, but he looks like he's doing pretty good. I'd be very optimistic that he's back for the start of the season.
So I've got 3 names in my last question, and this one's going to be kind of I don't even know if this is really a question. It's just names kind of thrown out there and get your feedback on them. But
Sure.
It's just some free agency talk and chatter that's going on right now. I haven't seen this guy's name linked to the Mavs, but I'm hearing a lot of chatter from Mavs fans wanting us to take a look at him or wanting to pursue to sign him to an RFA, and that's Brogdon with Milwaukee. What are your thoughts on him? Is this going on, or is this just fans creating this?
Well, no, I can, from talking with Fish and everything, it's the Mavs like Brogdon. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And why shouldn't they? He became a member of the 50-40-90 club this year. Super efficient. Every single year since he won that Rookie of the Year, he's improved in pretty much every statistical category. He's a really good glue guy. He's one of those guys that you could plug in with Luka and Porzingis, and he'd fit seamlessly, and there wouldn't be like a power struggle or anything like that. He'd just automatically be a really good third guy. And the only thing with me, and I've said this on Twitter a few times too in the last couple of weeks, but the thing with me is like you said, he's a restricted free agent. So there's so many good names on the unrestricted free agency list that if you spend, I think it's 3 days, you have to wait for Milwaukee to match an offer sheet if he signs it. So during that 3 days, you could have a bunch of people come off that unrestricted free agency list, and then after that's done, if Milwaukee does match the offer, then, you're just kind of out of luck. So, he's a really good player. Pretty much with restricted free agents, you're going to have to overpay a pretty good bid if you're going to convince their current team to pass on matching an offer. So as much as I like Brogdon, I don't know that the Mavs are going to be patient enough to make an offer sheet to him.
You almost have to play free agency chicken when it comes to the RFAs, because if they're talking to Middleton, or it's leaking out that Middleton's going to re-up for the max or near the max there, I think you might be able to make a play for him then, because they probably, I don't think physically will keep both guys if that's the case, but that's something that they might not know in enough time when you're talking to everybody else. Another RFA is D'Angelo Russell. Last episode on our show, Chris and I were looking at Vegas odds, and the Mavs, I believe, were number 2 or 3 on D'Angelo Russell. So what are your thoughts on him? Is this a real thing? Is this just chatter? Could this be something that happens?
I think that's probably just chatter. I don't put much into the betting odds stuff, even though I did find that pretty interesting because there's a lot of talk about Kyrie. I was listening to NBA Sirius XM radio, and there's some guy on there saying that Kyrie had narrowed his decision. He cut the Knicks out of his decision, apparently. Obviously, we don't know that for sure yet, but he said it was between the Lakers and the Nets. Well, if he goes to the Nets, unless they're going to try and make a Russell-Irving pairing work somehow, you have to figure that, Russell's probably gone if that happens. I don't know.
It's intriguing, right?
It's intriguing, and as a fit, I could see it, and he definitely fits the timeline with Luka and Porzingis too. The only thing about Russell, and I don't know, when I saw that, I started looking at some stuff on his social media pages and everything. He posted a picture, and he was with Dwayne Wade, Carmelo Anthony, and Devin Booker. And I don't have anything against Devin Booker, but he put a picture with those guys, and he put role models.
Yeah,
that kind of turned me off to that idea a little bit.
Yeah, I think that for the same reasons that I don't care for that group. The one thing that's interesting to me is Chris and I were talking on our last episode about Durant, and I told him, and I wanted to hear I think that if Durant chooses Brooklyn, and I think everybody keeps saying Knicks, and Vegas thinks that way. That's what everyone thinks. But I keep going back to the Nets as being where he goes, and for some reason my gut tells me it's Nets all the way. If he goes there, I don't think he's going alone, and I think Russell is out because I think he's either teaming up with Kemba or Kyrie there. And I don't know if how that fits with the Mavs. There's Chicago. There's other teams that are going to throw money at the guy, right? But it's certainly something to keep an eye on because I think he 100% because is Durant wanting to go play with D'Angelo Russell? I wouldn't think so, just from what we've seen, right? So it's,
and I mean, obviously the Knicks, they're going to get all the publicity with the national media and everything, but I do think the Nets, they need to, people need to start talking about them a little bit more because I think they have a legit shot at some of these guys that the Knicks have been linked to. And, I mean, like you said, if that happens and somebody else goes with KD to Brooklyn, I mean, I could definitely – at that point, if one guy goes to Brooklyn, depending on who it is, they might decide to keep Russell on the team. Now, if it's two guys going, I don't think there's any chance Russell stays there. So at that point, then you got, you can start thinking about making him an offer sheet knowing that Brooklyn's not going to match it. It'd be similar to when the Mavs got Harrison Barnes. They sent him an offer sheet while, Kevin Durant was deciding on where he was going to go. And then when he chose Golden State, they were like, well, we're not going to match and all that. They were going to match if Kevin Durant decided to stay in OKC, but
for sure,
we know how that all turned out.
So that's my question for you is, we've got all these moving pieces and everything else happening. So are we going to have a free agency freeze until Kevin Durant makes a decision? Is that going to be the first domino for the for the bulk of these big name guys, or are guys going to say, you know what, I'm going to start talking, I'm going to do this, I'm going to commit, or you think guys are going to wait?
I think it really just depends on which player. I mean, another thing about Kemba Walker, and I'm sure you guys have at least seen this or talked about it or something, but his agent is Jeff Schwartz.
Yes,
and he's a very Mavs friendly guy.
For sure,
as an agent, that's Dwight Powell's agent, and we all know Powell. He's poised to get a new deal. At least from what we've heard, he's probably going to end up getting some kind of extension at some point this summer, new contract. But anyway, you got that connection. If he decides that, or if Charlotte decides they're not going to give him that fifth year, or if they're not going to give him more than the regular max, he might already have it decided like, hey, there's Luka Doncic, there's Kristaps Porzingis. That's a really good young team down there in Dallas that's ready to win. If they get a big third piece, he may just go ahead and take his money there and forget about what Kevin Durant's doing. But I can't speak for Kemba. I don't know that.
Right.
I don't know how some of these other players are thinking. But I mean, I don't think Kevin Durant is going to hold up everybody.
Good.
Especially with like the second tier guys. We've seen it in the past.
Was it Aminu who signed in like 3 minutes 4 years ago?
Yeah, and even more recent than that, last year it was Doug McDermott. The Mavs wanted to keep him around, and then like just a few hours after free agency began, he took a deal with Indiana. So, I mean, these second tier guys, they're not going to wait. They're going to go and get their money. Whoever wants them, and that's one reason why a lot of people are like, well, let's don't waste time on Kemba and some of these other bigger names. Let's just go ahead and pair two tier 2, tier 3 guys or whatever while they're willing, to get their money fast. So, and I mean that's I understand why people might be worried about that. But my argument is, unlike years in the past, the Mavs aren't in a situation where it's all or nothing. If they swing and miss on a big-time free agent and some of these second-tier guys end up going somewhere else too, it's not as big of a deal as it used to be because no matter what happens this summer, you have Doncic and you have Porzingis, and, I mean, that's two really good cornerstones going forward.
For sure, and that's a name that no one's really talking about. I wanted to hear your thoughts real quick in closing, because I know you got to go, and I appreciate you for being with us for about right at an hour. The name I'm thinking about is, let's say the dust settles, Mavs miss out. It's a player who's in trade talks last year. Do you think there's any legs to the Mavs making a move for Mike Conley, especially since they might be drafting Ja Morant? Is that something that could happen, or is even feasible?
Well, it's kind of, I don't know. I haven't looked at that long enough to kind of, put the numbers together and see what would work and, what wouldn't work or whatever. But it really just depends on what. It's kind of like Houston and Capella, what they're wanting back for him. It really just depends on what the Grizzlies would want back for Conley, because, on the one hand, he's a really good player. He's underrated. But that contract, it's really inflated. He's not the most durable guy. He was pretty durable this past season, but he's not, you never know with him. It's kind of like a Chris Paul situation. So I have to look into that a little bit more. I could see him being a type of, point guard they'd be interested in pairing with Luka, but I just haven't looked into it that much. I will say, as far as Mike Conley goes, I think, a team like Utah, there was some buzz around them at the trade deadline, and I think that they could be a team that makes a play for him this summer.
For sure, yeah. He makes $30 million this year. Or I'm sorry, next year he's going to make $32 million. And he can opt in to 34 in 2021. Right. So, I would assume he would, more than likely, because of his injury concerns and things like that. So, yeah, it's the name I thought of, because if there's one thing I've learned being a Mavs fan for all this time, it's that if the Mavs have a link to someone or have tried to trade for them, there's always going to be chatter brought up again at some point in their career. Kind of like Kemba last season, the Dennis Smith rumor about trading to Charlotte for Kemba.
Right.
So it's always intriguing to me to see those things. How Kid came back and everything else. So that's what we got. Is there anything you want to add before we dismiss this pod, sir?
Well, the only other thing is, I could see, we were talking about Chris Paul earlier, and how I don't think the Mavs would want to add that kind of money for that many years to do that kind of trade. Now with Conley, that's a ton of money going through, the 2020-2021 season. But, like we talked about before, you get a guy on a 2-year deal that expires, that's $34 million coming off the books for summer of 2021.
Yep.
So,
that's why I thought about it. Sure.
Yeah. I think with any kind of potential trades that the Mavs might look into, even if they don't pull the trigger on it, if you see something about the Mavs looking into a trade, I think you have to, kind of keep that in mind, because they might not admit to it, but I think they've got their eyes set for that summer.
I like it. Well, Dalton, I appreciate you so very much for coming on and being on Chew on Sports with us, with Chris and I. For the people, you can follow him on Twitter at Dalton_Trigg. That's Trigg as in go, G as in go. He writes for DallasBasketball.com. Get on there and check out his articles. Read Plan B. It's actually a really good article. And then Step Back Mavs is his podcast. Give him a follow. Give him some likes. Check them out and follow him on Twitter as well. Dalton, thank you so much, buddy. I appreciate you so much for coming on. You're the man.
You got it, guys. Anytime. Just hit me up.
All right, for sure. And for everybody else, thanks for tuning in. We'll be back Wednesday with all of our normal podcast goodies going over the NFL and everything else. Peace out, everybody.